So good morning on this cold morning. Look at us, we're bundled up. First of all, let me find out how many of you are presently Waldorf parents? Okay. Grandparents counts always. Yep. And how many of you are in the early childhood or kindergarten? Good. How many in first through third grade? Fourth through sixth? And seven or eight? And high school. Okay, that's perfect. You're here for the first part of the experience. So it's very interesting. After many, many, many years of being a Waldorf teacher and having been a Waldorf parent, and I'm still a Waldorf grandparent, you see it differently as each age goes by. And those of you who have older children know that you look back and you say, I hope I did this right. But the answer is there's never right. It's always in becoming. And so this question really is, what do we mean by education? What do we mean by Waldorf education? And what are your experiences? And what are we trying to do in the education? So there's no Waldorf education says, because it's all based on the child. But what lives within Waldorf education is the understanding of the development of a child. And that hasn't really changed. It's been adapted. Children are a little bit different today. There are different influences. But the basic time of development hasn't really changed radically. Society has changed. And now, since the 1990s, we have all the results of brain research. And that has been very exciting because it's brought the confirmation of what we've been doing intuitively, now to be able to actually see things on PET scans and MRIs. And you wonder, well, how did we do this before? Well, we did it through intuition. And when Rudolf Steiner first started the first Waldorf school, right after the First World War, he had already worked with one particular child who had hydrocephalus, large head, and couldn't function at all. And he was just hired as a tutor in the family, and he worked for hours to be able to do 15 minutes with this child. And then gradually, he began to see how he had to bring this child all the way down to the feet. And he'd be exhausted afterwards. And he did this for a couple of years, and the child began to come into his own, was able to go to school for the first time, was able to go into university and became a doctor, and was killed in the war. But that everyday working was a very important thing as he began to do his own research into what is child development. And he was also bringing a spiritual aspect to it and looking from that point of view, what's the bigger picture of a child coming down? We've had many wonderful psychologists in international education who have observed children. And Piaget and Vygotsky and so on, there are many of them. They all intersect. What Rudolf Steiner brought differently was he brought this very broad picture of the child's coming into being, developmental stages of the child, and right down to the classroom. How to, not examples, they are examples, but they're more suggestions of how to see children, how to deal with certain situations. And of course, the teachers are free to change it and do it. But the important thing is there's a kind of continuity. And I think if Waldorf education has anything that really stands for it in its essence is the continuity of time. And I was thinking yesterday about this, having talked about this many times. What happens, you go, I don't think I know anything. And that's what happens when you get older. I remember my last year teaching at the school here, my beloved school. I was in the high school, and I'd been teaching for years and years. And I remember the day when I said, I'm finally starting to get it. I wish I could start all over again. But you never can. It's the same thing with parenting. You wish you could start all over again. I remember being on a trip with my daughters and sitting in the back seat. We were in somewhere in the Southwest, and I said, I think I made so many mistakes. And they said, Mom, stop it. You're a wonderful mother. And yeah, right. But we all have our little list. I could have done that better. I could have done that better. And that's life. That's life. So when we think about the child, who is this child? I don't know if you've had that experience of holding that baby and going, who are you? What are you going to become? Who are you? And then you think, every child is so different. And they have their own temperament, they have their own likes and dislikes, and yet they all have a pattern of development. And that's what we need to honor. Because that pattern of development has to do with the unfolding of new capacities, new possibilities. And if we can honor those times and give them time to develop, then we really support the health of the child. If we want to rush them because we want them to become more like adults, we're going to take away certain possibilities. And we know the result today. We're seeing this all around the country, and not just in this country. I just read this morning on Facebook that France wants to ban all cell phones for every age, all the way through. And now all of the ministers in the government are talking about it. And someone said, well, first we got to start with you, the ministers, the adults. And that is our issue, isn't it? We have to look at ourselves because we know children imitate us. And if you really want to wake up, go to the playgrounds and see what's happening as the children are playing and who's on the phone. Even nursing, who's on the phone. So we have a lot of work to do as parents. And in some ways, we've lost the intuition of what it means to be a parent. And what we have, and it's not new, it's been going on for probably 100 years, we've lost the intuition of parenting, and we want to know, what do we do? You know, I want my child to like me. Well, that's not the job of a child to like you. You know, it's the job of the child to love you in a deep way. And so we're always looking at ourselves as parents. You know, what is it that I'm doing to relate to this child? And I thought about it yesterday. I thought, you know, there are two gifts that we give our children. One is time, and the other is love. And each of those has, you could write pages and pages about each one. But the time to develop according to what a child unfolds, and to understand the stages of development, and that's what I'll talk about, because that is so specifically important in Waldorf education, that we understand the differences at every stage, and within all the individual differences, of course. And then the other is love, but not something that's airy, but love that is commitment and understanding and kindness and sternness at times, but really that deeper love for a child. That's what we can give our children. And so we begin the process of education. Have any of you been to the TOTS program here at the school? Oh my goodness. This is a joy to go to the TOTS program with Anne Landgraf. Well, this morning I was on my walk on the trail. It's really freezing cold at 7. And I was walking with my neighbor who is a grandparent, a Waldorf grandparent, who is now visiting the TOTS program with not her own grandchild, but a friend's. And we were describing it. We were talking about it. I said, well, tell me about it, because I'm going to talk about that this morning. What is it that's happening with these 1 to 2-year-olds? Because that sets a stage for what goes on throughout the years. Well, first of all, it was very quiet, very assuring, very comfortable. The routine was the same every time. These are 1 to 2-year-olds. So they come in and they play. And some are crawling, some are beginning to walk, and they go to their favorite toy. And they just play. And then there's a time when they come back together and they're sitting on laps or they're sitting on their little bottoms. And then there's a song, there's a little story, there's some food. And then they go for a walk in this beautiful garden and to visit every animal. And they go and they give grass to the cow, and they give the leftover from snack to the pigs. And they go and they visit every animal, Atticus the llama, and I mean, this campus is amazing. Come on in. And they visit the lamb, the new lamb, and they visit. Every time it's the same. And then they come back in and they do a little song and they go. And what she said was, everyone knows what's happening. It's all based on rhythm. That's time, the rhythm of the young child. And we also can call that place memory. So as soon as those little ones come in, as young as they are, they know where the toy is they want to play on. This one knows he wants to be on the little rocker. This one wants to do something else. They already know that. It's in their body. So this question of rhythm and time and familiarity, all that's very, very important for the young child. And so I hope some of you will eventually get to visit the TOTS program. It's really wonderful. And I guess there are different ones for different ages. So then there's kindergarten. And what's happening? Well, you can almost say it's the same thing, but it's different. So what happens in the kindergarten? How many of you, again, have been kindergarten parents or are kindergarten parents? A lot of you, okay. So what's going on over there? Well, you notice, first of all, that there's a mood. There's an ambiance in that room. There's something that's soft, but it's not soft in a way that it's fluffy. It's not an overdose of sensory information. If you visit a lot of early childhood programs or kindergartens, you can hardly breathe because there's something in every spot in the room, hanging from the ceilings, on the walls, And when there's no place to rest your eyes. So there's something calming about being in an atmosphere where it's very conscious what's there. The colors are softer, the toys are made of natural materials, and you begin to see, oh, there's a rhythm. The children play outside, which is very important. They come inside, they're quiet, they're listening, there's a little story, there may be a puppet play. Every day there's a different grain that they have, so they get to know, I'm seeing smiles, this is wheat day, this is rice day. They begin to have a sense of the rhythm. And gradually they're learning to come right into their fingers, they're pouring, they're helping to cut vegetables. So what we see during this whole period up till about 4.5, 5, is this coming down into the body. This great soul that every one of us has been and every child is, this enormous soul or soul spirit is coming into this teeny body and gradually has to take it over. And you see it first, the little feet are wiggling, the hands are wiggling, and there's the first smiles, the cooing. This is so important. This is all this connectedness. And we know now the first 3 years is all about that. And if they have this connectedness in those first 3 years, they have something for the rest of their lives. And you could say that in a way, you could say this feels the world is good. I can trust. I can trust the world. And those 3 years give that foundation. And if it hasn't been like that, we have to do remediation. And we find sometimes we do years of remediation because something was broken. I know this is your work, Barbara. Something was broken in those early years. And yet there's a tremendous understanding, unconscious understanding on the part of children that the world is still good. When I was in college, I worked with children whose parents were in prison. And I thought I was going to find all kinds of dysfunction. And no matter how difficult the situation was, those children had a love for their parents. For them, the world was good because they got to visit their father in prison. And that was staggering to me. When I worked up in Marysville, we did a Waldorf program for young teenagers who were adjudicated in juvenile hall. And we learned some really interesting things. That program went on for over 10 years. One of the things we learned was that the children who knew, these were teenagers, who knew their parents, even if their parents were criminals, they had a sense of where they were from. And the ones who had no idea who their parents were, they were always looking for the parent. And that was also interesting to me because I figured, you're adopted into a home, but very few of these kids were adopted as any homes. They didn't even have places to bring their work home. Food wasn't an issue. They didn't have much food. This was just up in Marysville. So we learn a lot sometimes by looking at the extremes where something isn't working, and then we bring it up, and that lets us relax a little bit. They're really doing an okay job. There's a fairy tale or nursery tale that a lot of children know, The Three Bears. And what happens in The Three Bears? What does Papa Bear say about the bed? It's too hard. Come on, tell me. What does Mama Bear say? It's too soft. And what does Baby Bear say? I want you to keep in mind just right is what we need to do. We can't be perfect. We have to do it just right. Just enough. Just enough. That's my new thing, just enough. Because we get too caught up in wanting to do everything the right way. And you can do that in Waldorf education too. We can all become a little bit, fanatic. And we have to it's just right. Okay. So here we go. We're in the kindergarten, and the sense of rhythm is there, as I mentioned. The children are coming into their capacities to use their hands. They're teasing wool. They may be sanding their sword. So they're using their tactile connections. They are open through their senses. There's one phrase that Rudolf Steiner gave that I think has been very helpful for all of us as teachers. The young child is a total sense organ. They are absorbing everything through their eyes, through their ears, through their taste. They taste everything. Through their movement. And so we have to be aware. Why is that atmosphere in the kindergarten a kind of soft, nourishing atmosphere, like warm soup? Because we're protecting the sense organs. And so not to overload, not to be going too fast in things, not to make them too loud, but to try to just protect those early years. And by the time they're 5, they've got a lot of strength and power, and they're testing their physical bodies, and you watch them out on the playground. It's a wonderful moment when children learn how to pump that swing. Look what they have to do. They have to coordinate their muscles. They have to know they're thinking about it. What am I going to do? And they practice it, and then one day it's there. And they'll never forget it. They'll never forget it. Another really important mark of coming through kindergarten, being ready for first grade, is being able to skip. And if we had more room, I'd have you up skipping right now. But what happens when you skip? How's skipping different from hopping? You can answer me. How's it different? It's got a rhythm. And once you get into the rhythm, you just keep doing it for a long time. You see the children, they're just smiling. What else is how skipping is different from hopping? What do you do when you skip?
Can be coordinated?
Yes, absolutely. And the left and right has to be coordinated. Right. Yeah. What's another one? What happens when you actually pick your feet up in skipping? You let go of the ground. And you have to come down in a rhythmic way, totally coordinated. And then when it gets into the rhythm, then it's pure joy. And that moment of joy is something that happens throughout education when the health of the child, the rightness of that stage meets the world in a way that is meaningful, and you get this moment of joy. It doesn't come when they're learning something. It comes when they've practiced it and it's there. Watch children with jump roping. How they practice it and practice it and practice it, and then they've got it. They can go backwards and forwards. And I grew up when we did double Dutch in our play yard, double Dutch. Well, it was gone. Most schools don't do double Dutch. They don't do jump roping. They hardly have recess. But now it's happening, coming out of the cities. Double Dutch has become the new gymnastics. It is amazing what kids are doing. And they're doing all kinds of twists and turns, all under 2 ropes. It's amazing to watch. So there's always room for things changing, becoming more artistic. All right. Something else that's very strong about Waldorf education, you notice it right from the beginning, is the role of the arts. There's music right from the beginning. There's music of singing, there's music of playing instruments, there's drawing and painting, there's modeling. There's all of this in there right from the beginning in kindergarten. And on they continue into the grades. But they become more and more conscious of what they're doing. So they're learning. And the great gift of the child to the adult world is imitation. They have total trust that what we as adults are doing is worth copying. And if you've been in the kindergarten, you can really laugh at times. So one of my favorite ones, two. One is, this was true. When I was here in the high school, we built the fence around the kindergarten. And one of the 12th graders said, "Oh, I'm so glad we can build this fence. But did you see what happened the other day? There was a little boy who was imitating making a fence, and he was going like this. Damn, 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 damn." Somebody's parent was hitting his hand with the nail. But that's what they don't differentiate. I shouldn't do this. This is what parents do. No. Total imitation, unconscious will. Another one was I was visiting a kindergarten, and the adults were sitting around the table. It was the late afternoon, and a few children were still around. The little girl comes walking by with a bucket, and she says, looks at us with tremendous seriousness, and she says, "We're building an ocean." Fine. She goes and she gets water. She goes back out. It's heavier now. A few minutes later, she comes in again. "We're building an ocean." She goes, this goes on 5, 6, 7 times, and then one time she goes, "We're building an ocean, just pretending." And then that's that difference that happens in kindergarten, is the difference between reality and imagination. And you see them beginning to do this, not because they're filling in some sheet, but because they're living life. All right, now they've come to a point of a certain physical maturity, emotional maturity, and they're ready for first grade. Emotional maturity is one of the most important things. Have they learned to play with each other? Do they share? Can they deal with disappointment? Do they go into hysterics when their block tower falls down? How do they deal with it? I have a grandson who's now 27, 28, and he's always been what my son calls a high-maintenance kid. And so when I would be visiting them in Boston, and we'd be playing with blocks, at first it was, it fell down. And I'd go, so then I started playing with him. We got to the top, and I go, "Okay," and then it would all fall down. And then we go, "Okay," and it would all fall down. And the anxiety was gone, because we just turned that all into play. And he had a way of coping. So we need to model coping skills with children this age, so that it isn't the end of the world because the blocks fell down. And you make a game out of it. And they go right with it, and that's the wonderful thing. All right, so they're in first grade. And now one of the big differences, they have chairs and desks. You might think, well, what's so special about that? Well, it's a big deal, because the question is, can they sit and listen? Can they put all that movement, which has been so important, all that movement through the stories and the puppet shows, which are very important, and they take that all inside their mind? Now, they've had so much language. One of the strongest things about the Waldorf kindergarten is language. They are embedded or flooded with language, and not very loud and not very often, the story and the puppet shows. What's going on in the puppet shows? And they will take the stories they've heard, they'll enact the puppet shows by themselves. They'll just pick up something and begin to do it. They're working in imagination, but they're following sequence, and they're learning to do that. One more kindergarten story. I was in Chicago, and Spirit Airlines, which is Southwest, they realized they were Waldorf schools at the different Southwest hubs. And so they had gone and visited the Chicago Waldorf School. And then the journalist wanted to interview me. And she said, well, I had a very strange experience the other morning at the Chicago Waldorf School. I said, well, what was that? This little kindergarten child walked out, his mother was waiting, and he said, I've had a glorious day. And do you know what the journalist said to me? That is old-fashioned language. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? So then I spoke to the speech pathologist in the school, and she said, I can't put my finger on it, but there's seats up here, but these children's language is so far beyond what's happening in the other kindergartens. And that was interesting. She said, I really want to do a research study because this is so fascinating. And then you think, well, it's pretty obvious. Have you been in the kindergarten, you see how language is brought, and the words that are there to describe characters in the story, and they just take these words in, and they figure out how they're appropriate, and they use them. So language becomes very, very important. So that continues into the first grade. And now we have all of the, is my child going to learn to read? All the worry of the parents. Will they get a job? It's serious. We carry anxiety with us in our society, right? We do. We're always worried. Are these 6-year-olds going to be able to cope with life, of which we have no idea what's going to be like? If you think just back 20 years earlier, we couldn't have predicted cell phones and everything else. And now we're talking about cars that don't have drivers. And I feel like a real relic sometimes. I'm really worried about a car without a driver. But I think they probably were worried about a lot of things that I take for granted. And that's life. So, all right. So what are they doing in first grade? They're now becoming conscious of what they're doing. And so, again, story is very, very important in Waldorf education. Story was the education for thousands of years in every village. People told stories. That's how they passed on the morals of what's really important, who's of value. Why do those fairy tales have the 3 brothers or the 7 sisters? Because each one has an archetype. And you usually find if there are 3, that one is strong, brawny, one is brainy, and the third one has a heart. The simple heart, son or daughter. And who, in the end, wins the treasure is the simple one with the heart. So that's a lesson that's been coming through for thousands of years. And these are true moral tales. Of course, we have to adjust them. We have to know, for example, yes, we wouldn't say this is always blonde, because we're taking it from a particular culture. We want to make it right for our culture. And you'll see in the back there a book on Africa. Someone once told me there were no fairy tales in Africa. So I started researching. And it became a 70-page article, and then it became a 400 and something page book with fairy tales and fables and all these things. Every culture has its wisdom. Every culture. And it's our task to find that as teachers. So they're in language, they're hearing stories. Then what happens? They take the story, and the teacher may put the beginning of a picture on the board, a beautiful pastel picture, but you don't finish it because you want the children to do their own picture and finish it. So there's that room. And then out of the picture comes a letter. This is a long process. This may take 2 days. And then comes the letter, and they walk the letter. They draw the letter. They might even do it on the back of their neighbor. So they're bringing it into movement, into their bodies. And there are the sounds that go with this. And usually by Christmas, they've done all the letters. Now you could say, that's a long time just to learn the letters. even if they know the letters, they now have an experience in their bodies. We had a girl in first grade who already knew how to read. And another young child joined the class after Christmas. And this first girl, Tina, she said, I'm so sad that she missed it all. But she knows how to read. But she missed all the stories about the pots and the pans. It was the one about the pea. Because it went into the heart. And so this is really important. The role of story goes all the way through to 12th grade. So out of that comes context. In Waldorf, context is one of the most important things. They're not isolated experiences, but context. So you have the story, out of the story comes the letter, out of the letter comes words and sentences, and they're writing. And sometimes they're writing something they already know, and they can pick it out. So it's a process. It takes about 2 years. Some children do it right away. You know, I had a daughter who asked me, well, it was a son. He asked me, what did Andrea read first? I said, oh, she read The Hobbit. I'll read The Hobbit. I said, second grade. He read The Hobbit. I have a third child who didn't do that till 4th, 5th grade. You know, they're different. They're on different times, and they all get there. And we can't try to put what one child does onto the other. So we have to sort of read them and listen. That's what a teacher's doing all the time, is read those children, observe those children. All right, so they're working on their sounds and they're working on their phrases. What you notice about Waldorf children is they can express themselves. They can speak in sentences, they can say what they have to say, because there's every day there's a review and there's a discussion. So they're reviewing what they did the day before, and they're discussing it. And they have a lot of interesting things to say, you know, as you can imagine, 6 and 7-year-olds. And then if you look at their arithmetic, here they start very strongly. All 4 processes are done in the first grade: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Why? Because they're all related to each other. You start to find out that, oh, multiplication is just fast adding, and division is fast subtraction. Wow. You start to see patterns, and patterns are so important in learning, because if you can see patterns in numbers, then you start to see patterns in ideas, and you can begin to experience patterns in literature, history, science. And we know from brain development also that being able to see patterns is one of the most important ways in which thinking changes. If you can't see a pattern, you're locked into the specific, to the concrete detail. But if you see a pattern, then you can step back and get the bigger picture. So it's very interesting. By 2nd, 3rd grade, they know the pattern of the 9s and the 11s, and they can just work with it. What else do they do in 1st and 2nd grade? They do a lot of movement with arithmetic. Again, if we had more room here, I'd have you up, but you can do something with me. Let me help you if you're cold. So let's do our 3 times table. So take your hands. And we're going to start with the total. So 3 is, now imagine you have somebody there, 1 times 3. 6 is 2 times 3. 9 is 3 times 3. Now, you've got partners here. Barbara, come over here. Turn to someone next to you, because it changes it, and I want you to tell me how it's changing. Okay, we're going to go up to 36. Ready? 3 is 1 times 2, 3. 6 is 2 times 3. 9 is 3 times 3. 12 is 3 times 3. 15 is 5 times 3. 18 is 6 times 3. 21 is 7 times 3. 24 is 8 times 3. 27 is 9 times 3. 30 is 10 times 3. 33 is 11 times 3. 36 is 12 times. And then we would start backwards. We'll do 3. Let's try it. 36 is 12 times 3. 33 is 11 times 3. 30 is 10 times, and so on. I think you got the point. What has happened? What experience did you have?
Joy, fun.
Joy and fun, doing math. Yeah. What other experiences? What other change from doing it by yourself, doing it with someone? Marcel? There's what? There's relationship. There's relationship, absolutely. You're smiling, you're laughing. And what happens if you forget something?
My partner
Your partner or the whole group has it. So you keep going, so you're not being judged for having made a mistake. So you work on this rhythm, and they do a lot of stamping and clapping. That's what they're doing in there. And it's going into the body. But that's not enough, because you also have to individualize it. So then you're doing this, they're getting the rhythm, but then another day you can take a beanbag, and I can say, 33 is, and the youngster has to give back 33 is 11 times 3. You start with the smaller numbers. So you're individualizing it. So from the group to the individual. But first you want to make sure they have it as rhythm in their bodies. We bought our first car in Pennsylvania, and I'll never forget when we were buying it, the salesman was doing this. What's he doing? He is still counting like this. He must have learned it that way. And it's still in his body, and that's how he remembers it. And that's called place memory. All right, so math and language arts are very strong. They're all in preparation. There's not someone there saying, I'm going to say, oh, you're the fast ones and you're the slow ones. Not in first and second grade. By the end of second grade, we do an assessment. And we say, okay, how are they doing? Because second grade tends to be when there's a lot of change going on neurologically. How are they doing? And by the end of third grade, they should be reading. And they're reading at very different levels. If you have a child who's struggling in third grade, okay, he needs a little help. We do something to help. But most children are finding their way. And I remember with my grandchild, who's now 12th grade in this school, a very cautious child in the beginning. And he was second grade, and he wasn't reading. And that was fine. We would go for a walk on the bridge, and I'd say, we're looking at that. He couldn't read it. And then one day, it was Christmas vacation, he just read. That was it. It never stopped, big books. And it's just, I watch every time that happens for me as someone who speaks about this education. Yes, of course. But we always need that assurance because, as adults, we always have that little doubt. It's always that little doubt. Is it going to be all right? It's time and trust and love. So we watch this. And so by third grade, we have that experience where they're really coming in their body. You see those third graders, and they are just bouncing everywhere. They're doing all the things they can do with their bodies. But let's look at how the curriculum works with the third grade. To me, third grade is a pivotal year. They're somewhere between 8 and 9, right in there, very important time. And in the curriculum, they have stories from the Old Testament, bless you, in this culture. In another culture, there'll be another story, a series of stories that might show the journey, you could say, from paradise to the earthly world. And what happens? Adam and Eve are, and it's done as literature, Adam and Eve are sent out of paradise. What's going on there? Well, in paradise, there were 2 trees. One tree was the tree of life. The other tree was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And Adam and Eve have been told, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You may eat from the tree of life. And so they did. And they were innocent. But one day, and we can blame it on whomever we want to blame it, as a snake or Eve. That's another whole story. They eat the forbidden fruit. Now think of life as a metaphor. Eating the forbidden fruit. They eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what happens is they wake up and they realize that they are naked and they are ashamed for the first time in their lives. And now they got to go out the Garden of Paradise, the Garden of Eden, and they have to live on the earth. Now this is a picture of this descent that every one of us goes through out of a state of innocence, whatever words you want to use, out of innocence into, you could say, reality of living on earth. We all go through it. So what does the third grade curriculum do? It meets that. And over that third grade year, they become earth citizens. So what do you have to do if you're now on the earth and you're not surrounded by all the food you need hanging from trees and the temperature is wonderful, you don't have to do anything about clothing. What do you have to do if you're on the earth? Well, you have to, of course, make clothes. You have to make clothes. You have to grow food. You have to have shelter. And the third grade curriculum is all about this. It's about housing. It's about clothing. It's about, and you have to be able to measure. Because how do you know if you're cooking that you've got the right amount of salt or whatever it is? So they're learning measurement, time, volume, all in the third grade. But it's totally practical. And they're building real tools. And they're making things. And their handwork curriculum is all based on this, all the way through from kindergarten through 12th grade. The craft curriculum is all about being able to take the products of the earth and make something of them with beauty and usefulness. And third grade is all about that. And so by the end of third grade, I can do anything. That's the feeling of the child. I can do anything. And they have it for the rest of their lives. One of my daughters was at college, and she went to Honduras and was working with some boys in the teen center. What am I going to do with them? And I can knit. So she started teaching them knitting, and they loved it. I just read recently about on the subway in New York, there's a man who's been knitting. And they took pictures of him. He's been knitting and knitting and knitting, and now people are interested. They posted it. Now he's getting all these orders. But he loves doing it. So what's going on in knitting? So when I was doing my training, which is over 50 years ago, why knitting? Why did real science say knitting was so good for youngsters? Okay, what do you do when you knit? I didn't know anything about the midline then. We didn't know anything. It wasn't the 1990s yet. What are you doing? Well, you're following a thread. You're making a pattern, so there's mathematics. You have to keep yourself disciplined so your stitches don't become too big or too small. It's a lot of discipline. And then in the 1990s, what we learned, you're crossing the midline. Every stitch you make crosses the midline, which is bringing the two hemispheres together. So then we have the brain science to tell us, here's what you've been doing out of other kinds of research and intuition. How many of you are knitters? Not a big knitting group. Oh my gosh, come on, you Waldorf parents. So the whole difference from going from knitting and then they go to crocheting where you have one needle and you're doing, and then what do they do? By fifth grade, they're using 4 needles. And so this capacity of how I feel about myself and the things I can do, this is really that sense of self-esteem, very strong. All right. And so that third grade year is pivotal. And during that time, there's also something we refer to as the 9-year change. It comes somewhere between 8, 8.5, and 10. How are we doing? Right. And what happens? If you can imagine a sunny day like we had a few weeks ago, and you walk outside and just go like that, oh, it's beautiful, it's beautiful. But then the clouds come over, and what happens when it gets cold? We contract. Well, this is what's happening on the soul level of the child in the 9-year change. They're going from I'm being part of the world to stepping back. And in stepping back, they are separating from their parents. They're beginning to notice that other families are different, that every day isn't wonderful, and my hair is not as nice as your hair, and my nose is not as nice. There's all this stuff that starts going on. They're comparing, and they become moody. This isn't fair, and that's not fair. So they're starting to judge. Something is really happening. And third grade is when a lot of parents go, I don't think my child likes his or her teacher anymore. Oh, because they're going through this 9-year change, and everything is unsettled. It'll come again around 11, 12, come again in around 15, 16. We keep meeting these issues as we go through this development neurologically. So they're going through this, and they just want to know the world is okay. The world is still okay because they're seeing all the differences and criticisms. And I was talking to a principal about this downtown, and she said, to me, that's the dropout time. It's not that those children, particularly the boys, will leave school, but they've dropped out because they don't feel that they can do it. And we have a particular problem with the boys in our society. We're especially starting them in kindergarten, and we're already judging whether they can read or not, and then these kids go, school is no fun. I don't want to do this. And then it goes on, gets even worse. And we have a lot of concern about our boys for lots of reasons. And they need our love and our care. And they need to understand the development of a child. So we have this whole sense of contraction, and then it's almost like a dress rehearsal for adolescents. But they're not adolescent. They're 8, 9-year-olds. In Europe, they call this particular time the Rubicon, because out of the study of Julius Caesar, he was told that if he brought his army across the Rubicon, then that was basically civil war. And so they call the Rubicon. What's it called the Rubicon for? Most Americans are not going to recognize that term. But in Europe, it's a very common term. So I just call it the 9-year change. And it's very important to understand because that's where parents get anxious. They experience the child changing. No longer is the child just skipping and having a good time or dealing with issues that come in life. But there's a separation going on here. The world is beginning to get gray. And the one that hits me so strongly is the summer we took the children across country. And we had one who was an 8.5. And we had so much fun. We did so many good things. And we'd come back to the car and she'd go, well, that wasn't very interesting. And then we would do something else that was really a lot of fun. That wasn't very interesting. So this is that 9-year change. I also call it the justa. It's justa this, it's justa that. And you feel it's almost dismissive because they've lost the imagination of childhood. And you know that when you go back to your home where you were a child, and maybe you played, let's go climb the mountain or the big tree, and you go back as an adult. It's not a very big tree, it's not a very big mountain. But in your imagination it was. Well, what's happening in the 9-year change is they are losing that imagination. They're coming into the reality of life. And it's painful. It's painful. Now, something else that's happening during this time is the whole development of the inner picture. This is from kindergarten on, this emphasis in Waldorf education on storytelling. Because when we hear a story, we create the imagination of those characters. You've all had this when you read a book. What happens after you've read a book, after you've read the book, and you go to see the movie?
Yeah.
What happens?
Not as good.
It's not as good. It can't be as good as your own imagination.
No.
Now, what happens if you go to the movie first and then you read the book? What happens to you with your enjoyment of it?
You don't enjoy the book as much.
Yeah, because the image that's projected from the movie is so strong. It overpowers. So this is why we'll say, please don't show them these movies when they're learning these stories in school. You know, that goes all the way through 5th grade. You know, let them hear the stories of the Greek myths first, you know, before you show them something. And there's always this wanting to help. I want to I want to add to the curriculum. Well, yeah, but do it in the way that supports the child, instead of pulling them out of the experience of their imagination, because that they're going to carry for the rest of their lives. It's the same thing when we meet somebody. We get an impression of who that person is. We take it inside, and we respond to that. It's very interesting today when you have a friend on Facebook, and you haven't seen a picture, and you create a whole imagination of what that person is like, which may or may not be true, but it's usually just through the text or telephone. Each one will give you a different experience. So what we're trying to do in this education is give them as full a picture of developing their imagination as possible. So even in telling the story, you want to have lots of description. What does the character look like? How did the character walk? What happened? When I was in my teacher training, this was the hardest thing for me. I was this New York City kid who was smart, and I could ace a test and all that. But now I'm supposed to be telling a story. And I had the challenge of just telling a little fable that you would do in 2nd grade. And it was a fable about this deer that has beautiful antlers and how it, looks over into the creek and becomes so, enamored of its own antlers that it doesn't see the hunter. I worked on this story. I worked on this story so hard. And the next day was my turn to tell it. And so I told the story. And my teacher said, well, thank you, Betty, because it was in England. Betty, that's not my name. And then he said, Warren, you come up and tell Betty's story. And Warren told my story. But what he did was the greatest lesson I learned. He became the deer. And he told that story. He used his hands and he used his voice. And all of a sudden we were all there. And there was the deer. And the deer had such beautiful antlers. I couldn't tell it like that before I saw it, And there, and the whole thing. And, we're in the story. So that was such a change for me. I said, that's what it's all about. That's what the storytelling is. It's not about, remember, okay, this happened, that happened, that happened. Be in it. Because one of the hardest things for the Waldorf teacher is all these stories they're telling, and not from reading, but from telling. And so this is, because you are activating the child's imagination, you're in there with them. So this is all that's happening. Then we pass out of 3rd grade. And you think everything is wonderful now. We've been through the hardest time. 3rd grade is the most wonderful time to teach because of all the activities, But it's a hard time because every child is going through his or her own 9-year change. And you can feel it in the classroom. Okay, that one's over it. Oh, this one's just beginning it. You know? And my first teaching was 3rd grade. And it was just really interesting to see. You could almost have a little graph, you know, as they're over it. But now something is resolved. Time again. Something is resolved. Every time there's a new spurt of neurons, then there has to be time for consolidation. And that's something, if nothing else brain research has done, it's to show us the importance of activity, rest. Activity, rest. Because we're born with millions of neurons, more than we can ever use. And the experiences we have are going to see which ones of those are going to stay. And then around 11, I'll talk more about this tonight, around 11 comes a process of pruning, where the ones you haven't used fade away. And the ones you have used over and over again stay, those capacities. And this is what Waldorf primary school education is all about, from 1st through about 5th grade. It's practicing the music, practicing speech, practicing drawing, practicing painting, practicing this. All practice, practice, practice. And those are going to stay after the 11-year-old pruning process. And that's why we can have it. If we haven't had those experiences, we can learn, of course, but it's just harder. It's a little bit like having a garden, and you know in your garden, you don't just dig once, but you have to double dig, and then the seeds really can sprout. So it's a kind of metaphor that we have to double dig by practicing. And then those are the synapses and so on that are going to stay within the child, and the others are going to pass away. So there's a lot of emphasis in Waldorf education on repetition, rhythm, practicing, and of course the children feel more and more confident through that as well. So now 4th grade, oh my gosh, they have landed. They have landed. They are on the earth. They're forming tribes. They are testing their physical bodies. They are out there, they're running up the hills, and they're vying with each other, and they're like tribes. And so the stories are the Icelandic myths, the Norse myths, which is a lot of blood and gore, and they love it. And, you know, they do.
Yeah, they do.
When the first public Waldorf school in Milwaukee started, it was a 99% black population kids. And the teacher said, well, I'm going to try this. And so she was telling these Norse myths. They love it. They can't get over it. When's Odin coming and when's Thor? What's Loki doing? And it was just something, because all children go through an experience where there's a kind of fascination. Oh, tell me another scary story, because I can show you I'm so brave. So the other thing that's happening in the 4th grade, which is very important, is they've landed on Earth, and now where are we? Well, we're in Sacramento. And so the first real geography block. Up until now, they've had a kind of world geography, ecology, you could say approach, but now we're here. Let's go for walks. Let's begin to make maps for the first time. Okay, what kind of a map are we going to make? Well, let's start measuring the classroom. How big is it? And we can't make it on a piece of paper. We can't make it that big. So we start working with ratios. You know, because now they've been doing all the mathematical processes to work with ratios. And now let's imagine that we're on the ceiling and we're looking down. So make a plan of your classroom. Okay. Now let's make a plan of the whole school. So you have to walk around the school, and then they're going to make a map of the school. And then we have the river here, which is very, very important. They're hearing stories about that. Now, this area. I don't know if the teacher's going to do Sacramento or Fair Oaks. It depends on the teacher. But now we start really coming in. So who are the people who came to Sacramento? So now we're in here. Who are the people who lived here first? So now we're with the Native Americans, the particular tribes that lived here. This land, by the way, was the winter camping area for some of the Maidu. In fact, when we unearthed what became the soccer field, they found the grinding rock. I think the 3rd grade still has it. I mean, where in the wintertime, they would come, they would get the acorns, and they would get the salmon. And they would dry it, and that became the food for the year. So right here on this ground, so the children hear the stories about this. And so those are the people who lived in Sacramento. Sacramento has 2 rivers. They're very different rivers. So one is a slow river. That's the Sacramento River. This is a very fast river. And they join downtown at Discovery Park. And so and from there, the water goes all the way out to the ocean. So by the end of that block, you're usually doing a California map. So they're really coming down, down into their place, which is very, very important. So do I know where I am? And then 5th grade, they move it into the whole North America, the United States, Canada, and Mexico, so that they're going out from the spot where they are in their classroom all the way out in geography and history. In science, 4th grade, they are working with the human being and animal. And that's a very interesting course because when we study animals, and children love animals, we find that every animal has a perfection to it. There's something that an animal has that no human being can do as well. You know, we don't have teeth like beavers that can cut down a log. We don't have eyes like the eagle. You begin to see. So each animal has this unique capacity. What does the human being have? In many ways, we're unfinished because we have brains. And we can make the tools. So we can't cut the tree down the way that the beaver can, but we can create an axe or a saw because we can think. So you begin to come to this whole picture of how does the human being stand in stewardship of the animals. So the animals have, you could say, almost a one-sidedness in their perfection, and we have possibilities. We have possibilities because we can think, and we can consciously decide how to behave. We can move from place to place. And where did you come from? Where did your family come from? We can move. Animals have a very hard time when they can't adapt to their surrounding. Human beings have to adapt. So we begin to have a kind of beginning anthropology in that block. And then 5th grade, that moves into the whole plant world. And we begin to really see the ecosystems, the plant world, and how the plant world is in relationship to the insects. And so you see this development. And then things change a lot in 6th grade, but I won't talk about that now. So what we're seeing is a physical development that's going on from birth. We see an emotional development that's being met all along the way. Doesn't mean there aren't problems. Life is full of problems. How do we meet the problems? That's the important thing. How does a child meet the problems? What support does the child have? Why is it important and helpful for a teacher to stay with a class a number of years? There's a sense of comfort, a sense of I know you, you know me. It may be 5 years, it may be 3 years, it may be 8 years. It may depend. But there's something about getting to know. I never took a class all the way through. I took 3rd grade in England, and then I did kindergarten here, and then I did subject teaching, form drawing, and knitting, and all of that. And then I picked up the class in 5th grade, middle of 5th grade, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. Then I went back and picked up a 7th, 8th, and began the high school. I had never dreamed I was going to do that. I had no idea I would teach high school. But when I arrived in Sacramento in 1965, I was met by a parent at the airport, and she said to me, a very strange statement, do you think a Waldorf school without a high school is like a chicken with its head cut off? What? Well, think about that. There's a proof. I had no idea I would ever be a high school teacher. But I always remember back to that time that Nancy asked me that question. And so we never know what comes to us from the world. And so there we are. All right. So physical development, knowing the changes are going to come, how can we support them? Emotional development through the years. There are going to be times when there's stress, times when stress is released. Healthy stress. There's healthy stress and unhealthy stress. Every time there's a new growth spurt, there is stress because something is happening unseen in the mind. That is, the child hasn't put it all together yet. They need the time. Usually it takes 3 to 4 years to consolidate before the next spurt comes. This is the wisdom. This is the wisdom of our mind. This is the wisdom of the intelligence of the body. It's incredible. And we need to honor that. So then we have intellectual development that goes on from the little TOTS program all the way through to 12th grade. And it's not over then, as we know. And I'll talk more about that tonight. And then we have psychological development, which is a little different than emotional development. It's the whole psychological soul development. Where do I belong in the world? Am I all alone? Who are my friends? How do I deal with betrayal? How do I deal with I like someone, I don't know how to show it. There's all this whole emotional, social emotional learning that goes on. Very, very important. And there's spiritual development. Who is this young person? Who is this person? What are this person's values? What does this person stand for? And you start to begin to see that more in the 7th, 8th grade, and then in high school, more conscious. Who am I going to be? Who am I? So we go through these, you could say forward step and then a little backwards. Forward step, a little backwards, until we consolidate every stage of development to become where we are today. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of this, and I want to leave time for questions, of this journey between kindergarten, basically, and 5th grade, which is a critical time. And then 6th grade is another one of these big spurts. Curriculum changes, the approach changes, but we'll do that tonight. So, questions? Yeah, please.
I have a question on the evolving throughout the history. The media came in gradually.
Good.
So good old days,
Yep.
story were told in a very, the original humane way, let's
Yes.
put it that way. And then later on, picture book came in.
That's right.
And we have huge amount of picture books around
Mhm.
today for young
That's right.
children. It's a must-have item.
That's right.
And then later on, you mentioned about the movie.
Yes.
Which is, if you don't go to see a movie, you are not qualified to be a youngster today.
That's right.
So I wonder what kind of impact, and as a parent myself, I
Mhm.
often, like every night is a story time. It's a must.
Yeah, of course.
But I'm holding a picture book. In the back of my head, I kind of like, is that necessary? The picture itself. And also, there's a sense of
That's you.
the pictorial part.
That's right.
And on the other sense, also with the hearing. And there's so much, as you said earlier, the speech,
Yes.
stimulation, constantly talking. And we are so vibrating as a whole earth.
Mhm.
So I wonder, how can I protect my child in a modern time?
This is
if I
wonderful.
would use that?
First of all, you just hit on such important things. The picture books are interesting. There's a place for them. But what is the picture book? It's somebody else's imagination. It's not yours. And so if you get fixed onto that, then that's the only way the child sees it. But tell them stories about your childhood. Those are the most wonderful stories. You can read the picture book, but tell more stories where you're not using the picture book. Because that's the most wonderful thing, is your life. Talk about your grandparents, the house you lived in, little things. And they want to hear it over and over and over again. So you balance it. It's always about balancing today. You're so right. We're flooded with all these sense impressions. And then you move on to, what did you say, after the picture book, it's the hearing. But the hearing is very important. But there the hearing goes with each page. But you do the hearing, the telling hearing, let it just roll out of you. Then it's coming out in a natural way. And then you've got the movies, absolutely. And then you've got some more. You've got the fact that you can play a movie over and over again. So you don't just see the movie, but now you can record it. And so it's over. So it's very strong. Those impressions are very strong. And then you see it, they play it out. You just go to the playground, you see them playing out the movies. And so we're constantly balancing it by healthy play, by healthy stories. But try to, you're looking at the movies or whatever it is. Yes, they want to be like everybody else. But you can say, in our family, we do this. In our family, we do this. So maybe the friend has seen 7 movies, your child might see 1. Now, it is true that with being able to show the movie at home, you have a little more control until they become preteens. And then they do things you don't know about. But while you still have control, you decide which one. And some of those movies you almost have to see before you take a child to. Because they're sophisticated, and a lot of, even the chapter books I've read them to grandchild, there's sarcasm, cynicism in there, and it's like, how can we break down these heroes? It's frustrating. And so always, and by the time they're in 3rd, 4th grade, you can talk about it. What do you think this person is doing? How should that person behave? Ask them questions about it. Get them involved in it. It doesn't mean it has to be the way that a character acts. How else could that have happened? So engage them in the stories in that way. But we're affected just as much, of course. And movies are wonderful in the right balance. Go see Lady Bird.
Yes.
Sacramento, and it's the most beautiful coming of age story of a girl. You know, it's just, and plus it takes place all over the city, which is fun. But she's done a magnificent job of capturing those images of just certain times of life, of adolescence. But also you see the yearning of a young person, even in high school, yearning to do the right thing, to give to others. But that has to be nurtured all those early years. So it sounds like you know what you're doing there, but you're very perceptive about what's happening. So balance it with your own stories and tell more stories and involve them in the discussion. How old is the child?
Oh, he's just a kindergartner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do too much analysis of it. But, you know, but maybe the picture book shows it this way, and how would you think it should be? You could ask him that. What does that squirrel look like in your head? Just once in a while. Another question, please.
Yeah, so I was curious if you could offer any insight into social dynamics, social development. You know, we've got 2 daughters, 8 and 10 years old.
Oh, you're right.
Kind of, can you know, speak to what they're going through in their social dynamics with the other girls in particular?
They're not in the same class.
No.
Okay. So you have 2 different things happening here. You're right in the middle of it. You have the girl thing, the boy thing, that's one. Leaving room for all the different gender combinations that are going on today, and that's important, and every child should be safe and loved. But there is a general gender issue between the way girls and boys meet the world. And for the boys in general, it's tell me who's in charge, what do I have to do, and what happens if I don't do it. It's pretty straightforward. Girls are very much more sensitive to and this goes right from the birth, sensitive to relationships, tone of voice, rolling of the eyes. They're just like, the sense organs, they're all there. They are picking all these gestures up. So the social interaction in girls is on all these levels. Who said what to whom, who wore this, and who did that, and who said what about whom, and it's like a drama. Everything is a drama. And the boys go, what's going on? They're protected from it. They try to have their own struggles, but that's not one of them. And so you've got the interaction between 2 girls, because of where they are with each other, what their relationship is. There's a lot of jealousy that comes up. This one has more than this one. How can I be recognized for who I am? How do I do that in a group? Some of it's physical, but a lot of it is how they feel. They feel connected with each other. I mean, it's interesting because girls will even cheat in a game because they want to be liked. Boys won't do that. They're in competition. They're going to win the game. Girls will sabotage themselves because they want to be recognized. Or they like this person so much they'll do anything for that person. You see, the whole emotional life is so much broader in the girl. With exceptions, you have some boys also who have it, but in general. So that's going on. And they're picking up all the nuances of the classroom and the family. And it's not always pretty, because they're trying to figure it out. They're trying to figure out, they're much more involved emotionally in trying to sort their lives out. So you get cliques, you get sass talk. Girls can be very bratty. A girl has a beautiful way of walking over, and I'll pick on, nice hat. Where'd you get that? Just the way that would be said. Another girl would get the message. They'd get the message. That, she doesn't like that. It's very subtle. And so they get hurt easily, and they can hurt easily. So they're trying to find their way through this. And it's not easy. And I think as women, we still struggle with the question of getting more emotionally involved, trying to become objective. Or perhaps we could say that the male is more objective, is trying to find more relationships and emotions. It's part of life. Can you give a more specific question on that?
Well, I think you answered it. But
How do you support that?
Yeah, that's.
How do you support them without totally going insane? But how do you support them? I mean, some of this they have to figure out on their own. It's part of growing up, and they have to learn how to navigate those waters. But at the same time, they are still young.
Absolutely. You support them by having conversations. That's the best thing you can do with them, is talk to them. And how to, this person hurt you, and what was said, how else could that person have, and you begin problem solving with them. What can you do? What would happen if you did that? So you gotta think about it. And maybe their first answer is not gonna work. Well, let's think of it. What do you think? Not what I think. What do you think? So if you go to school tomorrow and you do such and such, what do you think might happen? Let's talk about it tomorrow when you get back. So you're engaging them in stepping, because they're stepping outside of themselves and looking at themselves now. And those kind of conversations are really important. Another thing that can be helpful is in the family, having family meetings. So maybe once a month or once a week, whatever you choose, we sit together, parents and children, and we talk about how has the week gone? What has this week been like for you? Let's talk about one special thing that happened this week that was really nice. And we can talk about one special thing that was hard. So they start to, you have to look at that and express it, hear from each other. And they share too. So they see that adults also have things that are very nice and things that were hard. And maybe vacation is coming. And we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. They have things to say, but they need to know who's making the decision. But yes, invite them, have conversations. Bedtime conversations are often very good because they're a little more open, catch that moment. They're not having you read a picture book then, but these are wonderful moments of conversation. But meanwhile, remember, they're always watching you, and they are modeling their parents. They are modeling us all the time. Not just physically. You can begin to see as they get older, oh my gosh, they've done, like one of my children says, okie dokie. I said, okie dokie. Her husband says, okie dokie. Where would you get this from? Somewhere I started doing it. And they are modeling us, and that's part of their love for us. But there's no discrimination. So I think if you can do that, and 8 and 10 is really interesting because you have one going in and one going out of their
It's
process.
interesting.
Yes, but they also have the possibilities they get older of being good friends.
They are.
They are
good
already.
They are good
That's
friends.
wonderful. And one might be more of a supportive type. One maybe the doer. One may be more soft, more of a reflective kind of child. They're so different. And then you start to work with what's their strength, each one's strength. That's a wonderful family situation. Another question? Yeah.
You mentioned the example of helping, was it maybe your grandson with the emotional development with building a tower and being
Yeah.
okay when it falls down
Right.
and not needing to be so anxious. Do you have any kind of similar technique for the 9-year change for when you have that child that's saying, oh, that was not very interesting, or showing sort of a lack of gratefulness or whatever? Is there anything you can help when they're going
Say
through
to
that
yourself,
change?
this too shall pass.
Just hands off and let that pass, or do you
pass.
try to help
You
through
can't.
that?
Well, you can talk. Well, you yourself can be enthusiastic. Yeah. Oh, sure. Because they're seeing it, but where's it coming from? Because they're separating.
Yeah.
They're trying to look at you. They're saying, "Do you know that so and so's mother does da and so and so's father? Well, so and so doesn't have, or this family's." They're watching everybody. They're trying to take it in. It's a new level of the sponge. The child is a sense organ. But now it's on the emotional, soul level. They're sponging in. And so, but on the other hand, don't take it personally. And that was hard because we were having such a good time. This kid was just like, oh, that was not very interesting. So some of these things just go. Because they get to another stage where they can be really annoying. Consciously annoying.
Yes.
7th grade, oh my gosh. But tonight. But that's a wonderful question. Part of it is that we so often want our children to reflect us. And so we have to remember that's who they are. Of course, we don't want them saying stupid things and embarrassing people and being hurtful. Then I would certainly talk to them, of course. You're not
Yeah,
going
but
to do that again.
just the indifference, as you mentioned, that sort of attitude of none of this is any good anymore. Right? Yeah.
And you'll find that they're doing it earlier now. Children are doing that much earlier. A lot of it's imitation. They are hearing it from others, but they're also seeing it in movies. And it's a smart aleck young kid. It's called the adultified child.
Yeah.
And you saw it on the Bill Cosby show. You're seeing it. I'm smarter than these silly parents. It's annoying. But there were a lot of good things about that show too, aside from this problem. But so it's always, you're looking always for, where's the balance to this? Where's the balance? And cynicism is just so much a part of our lives today. And then the more we get stimulated, the more stimulation we need and want. That's the other problem. So you go to the movies yourself as an adult, and the previews are so loud and so intense Yeah. And the next time they'll be even more intense because the kids, they need to get, it's like a dope. It's like dope. They need to get stimulated more and more. And as adults, we find it's too much. It's too much. But it's not too much for them. Teenagers are one, but it's definitely too much for a 9-year-old. And we have to really say, you know, if we're going to go to a movie, we're seeing this one, that's it. That's it for the year, or the month, or whatever you decide. You are in charge. If I can give you one message, it's parents, you are in charge. This is your job. This is your job. Put the cell phone away during the meals. You know, start taking control because they will follow whatever you're doing. They are going to imitate it, and they'll be very quick to say, "But you did, but you did," and they're usually right because they watch everything we do. Good. Another question? We should probably. You done?
Done.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for
Thank
coming.